340 homes, zero water pressure. And Dorinda Blackwell was standing on my porch at 6 a.m., 9,000 feet up in the Colorado Rockies, breath fogging in the mountain air, mascara running down her face like black tears. Behind her, the peaks of the Gore Range caught the first light of dawn, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Beautiful, indifferent. The mountains had seen empires rise and fall. They would watch this one crumble too. "You did this!" she screamed, her voice cracking at the altitude. Her finger jabbed toward my chest like a weapon. "You shut off our water. My husband is on the phone with the governor right now. You'll be in prison by noon." I took a slow sip of coffee. Let the steam rise between us. Behind me, my father sat in his wheelchair on the cabin porch, watching the sunrise over the lake she had kicked him off of exactly 23 hours ago. His hands were steady now. His eyes were clear. For the first time in months, he looked like the man who had raised me. "Mrs. Blackwell, I didn't shut off anything." I kept my voice level, calm, the way I had learned to speak during 2 decades of federal service. "I simply closed an intake valve on my private property, a valve that's been illegally feeding your community for 15 years. I let that sink in. In Colorado, water rights aren't suggestions, they're the law. Her face cycled through colors I had never seen on a human being. Pink to red to purple to something approaching gray. The light blue suit she wore, her signature armor in every confrontation, was wrinkled and stained. She had clearly thrown it on in the dark, racing up the mountain as her phone exploded with panicked calls from 340 households discovering their taps had run dry. 2 Summit County Sheriff cruisers pulled up behind her Mercedes. A black SUV with federal plates followed close behind. She turned, and I watched her expression shift from rage to confusion to something approaching terror as she read the letters on the door. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. "Do you know what Colorado water rights are worth, Mrs. Blackwell?" I asked, finishing my coffee. "More than the houses they serve, more than your husband's construction company, more than every favor your brother-in-law, the commissioner, ever called in." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. 3 weeks earlier, I was nobody. Just a tired son who had driven 12 hours from Fort Collins to care for his dying father in a cabin at 9,000 feet. I had no idea I was about to destroy the most powerful woman in Summit County. The lake appeared through the lodgepole pines like a secret the mountains had been keeping. 800 acres of wilderness at 9,200 feet, alpine meadows rolling down to granite outcroppings, and water so clear I could see trout shadows 40 feet below the surface. Whitfield Lake, named for my great-grandfather, who had staked this claim before Colorado was even a state. My father's hands tightened on his wheelchair armrests as we crested the ridge on the old Forest Service road. The truck bounced over rocks that had been here since the glaciers retreated, and I slowed down, giving him time to take it in. "Still here," he whispered. First words he had spoken in 2 days. I glanced in the rearview mirror at my daughter Wren, 16 years old, and already bored by the 3-hour drive from the last cell tower. She was staring at her phone, which had been showing no signal for the past 40 minutes. "We're staying here?" she asked, looking up at the cabin through the windshield. "There's no cell service." "There's something better," my father answered, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "There's quiet." He had won this land in 1971, a federal homesteading lottery for returning Vietnam veterans, one of the last parcels granted under a program Congress quietly discontinued a few years later. 800 acres of Rocky Mountain wilderness that developers had been trying to steal for 50 years. The water rights alone were worth more than most people make in a lifetime, though I did not fully understand that yet. I had been gone 22 years. Army Corps of Engineers, designing water systems on military installations from Okinawa to Stuttgart. The kind of work where you learn that water is never just water. It is power, politics, and survival all flowing through the same pipe. I had built careers on understanding how water moved through the earth, how aquifers connected to springs, how a single control point could mean life or death for entire communities. My father never asked me to come home, even after the stroke. My sister called from Denver 3 weeks ago. He stopped eating, Cormac. He just sits by the window, staring toward the mountains, like he's waiting for something. Or someone. The cabin was smaller than I remembered. Built from logs my great-grandfather had cut himself in 1889, it had survived 135 Colorado winters. Dusty photographs hung on the walls. My mother at this same lake. Gone 11 years now. Her smile frozen in time, standing on the dock my father had built with his own hands in 1974. Wren grabbed her backpack and headed inside, already looking for electrical outlets. I helped my father down from the truck, his wheelchair sinking slightly into the soft mountain earth. He did not complain. He never complained. He just stared at the lake like a man seeing his whole life reflected back at him. We were not alone for 30 minutes before the first golf cart appeared. It was an absurd sight at this altitude, the little vehicle struggling up the old mining road, engine whining against the thin air. A woman sat behind the wheel, silver hair catching the afternoon sun, clipboard balanced on her lap. She wore a light blue suit, the kind you might see at a country club luncheon, completely inappropriate for 9,000 feet of mountain wilderness. She did not knock. She walked straight onto the porch like she owned these mountains. "I'm Dorinda Blackwell, president of Summit Ridge Estates Homeowners Association." Her eyes swept over our mud-splattered truck, my father's wheelchair, Wren's hiking boots still covered in trail dust from the walk to the outhouse. I watched her catalog every detail, judging us against some internal checklist of acceptability. We were clearly failing. We weren't informed of any property transfer in the area. "There wasn't one," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "This is my father's land. Has been since 1971. Federal homestead patent." Her smile tightened. At this altitude, her breath came in short puffs, and I could see a faint sheen of sweat on her forehead, despite the cool mountain air. She was not acclimated. Probably lived in one of those climate-controlled mansions I had seen in the valley below. "I see. Well, I'm sure you'll want to familiarize yourself with community standards. Summit Ridge has covenants regarding vehicle access, exterior aesthetics, and..." She glanced at my father's wheelchair, like it was a code violation. "Lake usage protocols. Lake usage protocols. For my own lake. The Summit Ridge community has maintained exclusive recreational rights to the eastern shore since 2009. Your father signed a water-sharing agreement." I looked at my father. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping beneath weathered skin. 74 years old, survivor of Vietnam, holder of a Bronze Star, reduced to sitting in a wheelchair, while this woman told lies about his own property. "No," he said. One word, like a door slamming shut. Dorinda's smile did not waver. Perhaps his memory isn't what it used to be. The altitude affects cognition in the elderly. I have documentation, standard practice for lakefront properties in covenant communities. Something shifted in my chest. The tired son who had driven 12 hours was being replaced by someone else. Someone who had spent 20 years cutting through bureaucratic lies and forged documents. Mrs. Blackwell, I spent 20 years as a hydrological engineer for the Army Corps. I know exactly what water-sharing agreements look like. I stepped closer, close enough to see the slight twitch at the corner of her eye. And I know what forged documents look like, too. Something flickered behind her carefully constructed smile, just for a moment. Then the mask snapped back into place. I'll have our attorney contact you, she said, already backing toward her golf cart. Welcome to Summit County. She did not mean welcome. She meant war. Day 3 began with the sunrise ritual my father had practiced for 50 years before the stroke took his legs. I wheeled him down to the shore, following the path he had worn into the mountain over decades of morning walks. The alpine glow hit the peaks first, then crept down into the valley, turning the lake's surface to liquid gold. Your mother and I watched this same sunrise on our wedding morning, he said quietly. Right here, right on this dock. The dock was weathered now, planks gray with age but still solid. He had built it himself in 1974, carrying each board up from the valley on his back, because there was no road then, just a hiking trail and determination. We had barely reached the water's edge when the golf cart brigade arrived. 3 vehicles this time, struggling up the slope in formation. Dorinda Blackwell in the lead, her light blue suit immaculate despite the early hour. 2 women with clipboards flanked her, and a man in a Blackwell construction polo brought up the rear, already sweating despite the morning chill. Whitfield, this area is designated for Summit Ridge residents only between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. Dorinda's voice carried across the water like a judge delivering a sentence. I'm going to have to ask you to return to your cabin. My father's response surprised us both. I built this dock with my own hands in 1974. His voice was stronger than I had heard it in months, echoing off the granite outcroppings. I carried my wife across it on our wedding day, 23 years before your community existed. You're not taking it from me. Dorinda's smile sharpened. The dock is a community amenity now, maintained by HOA assessment funds. If you'd like access privileges, there's an application process. 60-day waiting period. Background check required. A background check to use my own property? Water access is a privilege in Colorado, Mr. Whitfield. Not a right. She paused, savoring the moment. Unless you have senior water rights documentation, which of course you don't. My father's hand found mine, squeezed once. He knew something she did not. That evening, I called the Summit County Recorder's office. The clerk who answered seemed nervous from the moment I gave my name. Sir, I'd recommend you speak with an attorney before pursuing this. Her voice dropped to a whisper, like she was afraid of being overheard. The Blackwell family has significant influence in county government. What does that mean exactly? It means the county commissioner is Mrs. Blackwell's brother-in-law, and any water rights adjudication in this district goes through Judge Harlan Blackwell. She paused. Her father-in-law. I hung up, looked at my father who was watching me from his wheelchair, with eyes that had seen too much in 74 years of mountain living. They've been doing this since before your mother died, he said quietly. Pushed the boundary markers, filed false surveys, challenged my water rights in court 6 times. 6 times? I won every case, Cormac, but they just keep coming, like water wearing down stone. They think if they push long enough, I'll break. I knelt beside his wheelchair, seeing for the first time the weariness beneath his stubborn exterior. This was not just a property dispute. This was a siege that had lasted decades. Why didn't you tell me? Because you had your own life, your own career. He struggled with words that clearly cost him something. And because I thought I could outlast them, I was wrong. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for mine. The stroke wasn't random, Cormac. It happened 2 days after they filed their 6th lawsuit. The doctor said stress was a contributing factor. These people have been trying to kill me slowly for years. Day 6 brought the certified letter. Summit County Code Enforcement. Violation notice for unauthorized structure maintenance on the cabin. Fine. $18,000. Required action. Submit architectural plans to HOA review board within 14 days or face demolition order. The cabin my great-grandfather had built in 1889, 135 years old. A documented historic structure that had survived everything the Rocky Mountains could throw at it. And now a woman in a light blue suit wanted to tear it down because it did not match her aesthetic preferences. Attached was a cease and desist from Blackwell and Associates, demanding we discontinue all interference with established community water recreation access and submit to binding arbitration regarding disputed water rights. That was when I noticed the letterhead. The law firm's address was the same building as Clearwater Mountain Management LLC, the company that supposedly maintained Summit Ridge's water system. Same building, same suite number. In my 20 years of federal service, I had learned that such coincidences were never coincidental. I started pulling records, property filings, business registrations, permit applications. The picture that emerged was uglier than I had imagined. Clearwater Mountain Management was owned by Garrett Blackwell, Dorinda's husband. The same Garrett Blackwell whose construction company had built every piece of infrastructure in Summit Ridge. The same Garrett Blackwell whose father sat on the county bench, adjudicating water rights disputes. They had built a machine, a perfect closed loop of corruption where the same family controlled development, maintenance, legal proceedings, and government oversight. Anyone who challenged them faced the entire apparatus at once. Day 9 changed everything. I was in Frisco picking up supplies at the hardware store when my phone finally found a signal. Ren's name flashed on the screen, and even before I answered, I knew something was wrong. Dad, you need to come back. Her voice was shaking. Right now. I broke every speed limit on the mountain road. The truck fishtailed on loose gravel as I pushed it harder than the old engine wanted to go. 15 minutes later, I crested the ridge and saw them gathered at the shoreline. My father's wheelchair was stuck in the rocky mud, one wheel completely buried. He was soaking wet, shivering. At 9,000 feet, even summer mornings hover near freezing, and he had clearly been in the water. Ren was crying, her phone still recording. Smart girl. Documentation instinct I had taught her without realizing it. She pushed him, Dad. The words came out in gasps between sobs. That woman in the blue suit. She said he was trespassing on HOA property, and she pushed his wheelchair toward the water. He almost went in completely. I looked at my father. His eyes met mine, and what I saw there was worse than anger. It was humiliation. A 74-year-old veteran, Bronze Star recipient, reduced to helplessness by a woman who thought property values mattered more than human dignity. Couldn't stop her, he whispered through chattering teeth. Couldn't even stand up to protect myself. What kind of man? His voice broke. I helped him out of the mud, carried him up to the cabin, wrapped him in every blanket we had. Ren made hot tea while I built a fire in the old stone fireplace. For an hour, nobody spoke. We just sat together, listening to the wood crackle and watching the color slowly return to my father's face. Something fundamental had shifted in my chest. 22 years of Army Corps training were clicking into place. Analysis, assessment, strategic planning. This was not a dispute anymore. This was war. That night, I did not sleep. Instead, I opened my father's old filing cabinet, the one he had always kept locked in the root cellar, where the temperature stayed constant year-round. The key was on a chain around his neck, had been there as long as I could remember. He handed it to me without a word. Inside, I found 46 years of documentation. Surveys conducted by hand, my father's precise draftsmanship evident in every line. Water quality reports dating back to 1972. Geological assessments of the spring system that fed the lake. Photographs of boundary markers, some with him standing proudly beside them in his Army Corps uniform. Letters to and from federal agencies. Court filings from 6 separate water rights challenges, each one marked with the same result. Plaintiff Whitfield prevails. And one document that changed everything. A federal water rights certificate from 1978, signed by the Secretary of the Interior. Priority date, 1889, when my great-grandfather first filed his homestead claim. In Colorado water law, priority is everything. The doctrine is called first in time, first in right. Whoever established water rights first has senior claim over everyone who came later. It does not matter if you are a billionaire developer or a humble rancher. The date on your certificate is everything. My family's water rights predated every single well in Summit Ridge Estates by over a century. But it got better. The certificate granted Aldous Whitfield perpetual rights to all surface water and groundwater originating from the spring system located on Whitfield Parcel 147B, Summit County, including all model rimso aquifer distribution to a depth of 1,500 feet. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood. The spring on our property did not just feed the lake. It fed an underground aquifer, and that aquifer fed every well in Summit Ridge Estates. 340 homes. All their water came from our land, our spring, our aquifer, our waterfall, and they had been stealing it for 15 years. I pulled up county water records on my laptop, using the weak satellite signal that occasionally reached the cabin. Cross-referenced with my father's geological surveys from his Army Corps days. The picture that emerged was damning. Summit Ridge Estates had no municipal water connection. Impossible at this altitude, this far from any town. The development permit from 2004 showed they had drilled 14 community wells. But the wells were not drawing from independent groundwater. They were tapping directly into the aquifer that originated from our spring. An aquifer my family held senior rights to since 1889. An aquifer that had been illegally accessed for 15 years. In Colorado, that was not just trespassing. That was water theft, one of the most serious property crimes in a state where water was worth more than gold. I started making calls the next morning. Old-timers in the area, former neighbors, ranchers whose families had been here for generations. Mabel Thornwood was 83 years old, living in a retirement community down in Silverthorne. Her family had owned the parcel adjacent to ours until 1998. "The Blackwells bought up everything around you," she said, her voice sharp despite her age. "Anyone who wouldn't sell got squeezed out. They diverted roads, challenged water rights, filed nuisance complaints. Your daddy was the only one who held on." Eugene Carstairs, 71, now living in a small apartment in Denver. His family had ranched in Summit County for 4 generations. They condemned my access easement, said it was unsafe for emergency vehicles. His voice carried decades of bitterness. I couldn't even reach my own cabin. Had to sell for 40 cents on the dollar. Garrett Blackwell bought it the same week. Same week. The pattern was clear. 16 families over 40 years. Systematic land theft centered on one thing: controlling the water. My father had been the final holdout. The last obstacle to complete control of the valley's most valuable resource. And now I understood why they had spent 15 years trying to break him. It was not about the lake view or the property values. It was about the spring, the aquifer, the water that 340 homes depended on without ever knowing where it actually came from. I made 2 calls that would change everything. First, Patricia Yamamoto, Army Corps District Engineer, Sacramento office. We had worked together on dam safety assessments in South Korea 5 years ago. She was thorough, incorruptible, and had zero patience for people who violated federal water regulations. Cormac Whitfield. Haven't heard that name in 4 years. Her voice carried a hint of warmth beneath the professional tone. What do you need? A federal inspection of an unpermitted water extraction operation in Summit County, Colorado. They're tapping a protected aquifer without authorization. I have the original survey documentation. My father conducted it for the Corps in 1978. Silence on the line. Then, send me everything you have. If it's as bad as you're describing, I'll have a team there within the week. Second call, Stellan Birch, forensic accountant. We had worked together on a contractor fraud case at Fort Carson that ended with 3 federal indictments and 1 construction company executive in prison. How complicated are we talking? He asked. HOA president, her construction company husband, county commissioner brother-in-law, judge father-in-law. 15 years of water theft and financial fraud in a state where water rights are worth more than gold. He whistled low. I'll be there Tuesday. Book me somewhere with good coffee. It's going to be a long week. Stellan arrived with 3 laptops, a portable scanner, and an espresso machine he had brought from Denver. Within 48 hours, we had the full picture. Clearwater Mountain Management, LLC, the company charging the Summit Ridge HOA $220,000 annually for water system maintenance, was owned entirely by Garrett Blackwell, Dorinda's husband. The money did not stay in one place. It cycled through 2 shell companies registered in Wyoming before landing in a trust controlled by Commissioner Bradley Thornton, Dorinda's brother-in-law. 15 years, $3.3 million. 0 actual maintenance performed. The wells had not even been inspected since 2011. The infrastructure was aging, corroding, failing slowly, while the Blackwells pocketed every cent meant to maintain it. This is textbook embezzlement, Stellan said, highlighting another transaction on his screen. Wire fraud too, since the money crossed state lines through those Wyoming shells. And if any of these homeowners have federally backed mortgages, we're talking bank fraud as well. Patricia's preliminary report arrived by encrypted email the next morning. Cormac, this is significantly worse than you described. The original development permit for Summit Ridge references a water purchase agreement with the Whitfield property dated 2003. No such agreement exists in federal or state records. I've checked everything. It's a fabrication. The Whitfield water rights have 1889 priority, senior to everything in that valley. They've been extracting water illegally for 15 years from a federally documented source. Under Colorado water law, that's theft of a property right. Under federal law, it's unauthorized taking from a protected aquifer system. Combined violations, Estimated $8 to $15 million in fines and restitution. Criminal referral is already being prepared. My team will be there in 3 days. $8 to $15 million for stealing water that belonged to my family. But we were not finished yet. Ren found the smoking gun. She had been hiking around the property with her camera, documenting everything she could find for what she called her summer project. In reality, she was building an evidence file, cataloging every structure, every marker, every piece of infrastructure that might be relevant. "Dad, look at this." She showed me her camera screen. A photograph of a concrete maintenance access panel near the spring source. Weathered gray, half buried in alpine wildflowers. I had walked past it 100 times without noticing. "That's the intake control valve," I said, recognizing the configuration tut from my years of infrastructure work. "For the spring feed into the aquifer system." "No, look at the serial numbers. On the valve housing." I zoomed in. My blood went cold. The valve was U.S. government property. Military surplus. Stamped with an Army Corps of Engineers inventory code from 1978. My father had installed it himself when he surveyed the aquifer system for the Corps 46 years ago. It was part of a federal water monitoring program designed to track flow rates and conservation metrics for mountain spring systems across the western states. I found the paperwork in his files an hour later. A maintenance agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers allowing Aldous Whitfield to regulate spring flow rates for federal monitoring and conservation purposes, never revoked, still legally valid. The valve controlled how much water entered the aquifer distribution system. Turn it down and the pressure dropped. Close it completely, and 340 homes went dry within 6 hours. Completely legal. My property, my water rights, my federally authorized control mechanism. 46 years of documentation. Federal water rights certificates with 1889 priority. Geological surveys. Original Army Corps maintenance agreements. Shell company records. Financial flows. Photographic evidence. Witness statements from 16 displaced families. 243 pages. Triple backed up. Copies with 3 different attorneys in 3 different states. Ren watched me assemble the binder, her camera still hanging around her neck. What happens now? Now we wait for them to cross one more line. And then? Then they learn what Colorado water law actually means. We did not have to wait long. Day 16. The Summit County Sheriff's Department arrived with a court order. 2 deputies climbed out of their cruiser, looking uncomfortable in a way that told me they knew exactly whose errand they were running. Behind them, parked at the tree line like a general surveying a battlefield, Dorinda Blackwell waited in her golf cart, watching, smiling. "Mr. Whitfield, we have a complaint of elder endangerment." The lead deputy could not meet my eyes. "County Social Services needs to assess your father's living conditions." I looked past him to Dorinda. Her light blue suit was pristine today, her silver hair perfectly styled. She had dressed for victory. "Let me guess. Judge Blackwell signed the order." The deputy's silence was answer enough. She had filed a report claiming my father was being neglected at high altitude. Claimed she had witnessed him abandoned in dangerous conditions at the lakeshore. Demanded an immediate welfare assessment, using the incident she had caused, pushing a 74-year-old veteran toward the water as evidence against us. The audacity was breathtaking. The corruption was complete. I stepped off the porch, walked past the deputies, crossed the meadow until I stood directly in front of Dorinda's golf cart. "Mrs. Blackwell, I'm going to give you one opportunity." My voice was calm, controlled. The voice I had used in federal depositions and military briefings. Withdraw your complaint. Leave my family alone, and I'll consider discussing a reasonable water access arrangement. Her laugh echoed off the granite peaks. Water access? We have water access. We've had it for 15 years. She leaned forward, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. Your delusional father can't change that. He's old, he's sick, and he's alone. He's not alone anymore. You? Another laugh. You're nobody. A tired man who crawled back to clean up his father's mess. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Your community's drinking water comes from an aquifer that originates on my property. An aquifer my family holds senior rights to. Priority date 1889. 136 years before your first well was drilled. For the first time, something flickered behind her confident mask. That's impossible. Our water rights were adjudicated when the development was approved. Your water rights were fabricated based on a purchase agreement that doesn't exist. I have the federal records. My father surveyed that aquifer for the Army Corps of Engineers in 1978. He documented exactly where your water comes from. I leaned closer. And exactly how to control it. You're bluffing. I'm a hydrological engineer, Mrs. Blackwell. I designed water systems for the military for 20 years. 16 bases across 3 continents. I don't bluff about water. I checked my watch. In approximately 14 hours, you're going to discover exactly how much your community depends on my cooperation and my patience. I turned and walked back to the cabin without another word. The sun dropped behind the Continental Divide at 7:43 p.m., painting the sky in shades of fire and blood. I hiked to the maintenance panel Wren had photographed, following the faint trail my father had worn into the mountain over decades of monitoring visits. The valve was corroded but functional. Army Corps equipment was built to last, designed to survive in conditions far worse than a Colorado mountainside. I cleaned the mechanism, tested the action, and made my decision. I did not shut it completely. I adjusted the flow to 30%. Then I called Patricia Yamamoto. The valve is adjusted. I'm exercising my rights under the 1978 maintenance agreement to regulate spring output for system evaluation purposes. I used the exact language from the federal document, completely legal under the original authorization. The inspection team will be there at 0800 tomorrow. We're coordinating with EPA Region 8 as well. Unpermitted extraction from a protected aquifer crosses into their jurisdiction. Perfect timing. Cormac. Her voice softened slightly. Are you sure about this? You're about to make some very powerful enemies. I looked down at the lights of Summit Ridge Estates, 340 homes twinkling in the valley below, all of them built on stolen water, all of them depending on resources that had never belonged to them. I already have powerful enemies, Patricia. Now they're going to find out what that actually means. I hiked back to the cabin in darkness, navigating by the stars my father had taught me to read 40 years ago. The same stars my great-grandfather had followed when he first staked his claim on this mountain. By 4 a.m., the first calls flooded the Summit Ridge HOA emergency line. By 5 a.m., 340 households were discovering that their taps had run dry. By 5:45, Dorinda Blackwell was pounding on my door. Her light blue suit was wrinkled, thrown on in the dark. Mascara streaked down her face like black tears. The composed, calculating woman who had pushed my father into the lake was gone, replaced by someone unraveling at the seams. "You're destroying this community!" she screamed, her voice raw from the altitude and panic. "People have children, medical equipment. Elderly residents who need water for medications. This is attempted murder. I leaned against the doorframe, coffee cup in hand. This is Colorado water law, Mrs. Blackwell. First in time, first in right. My family's rights predate yours by 115 years. I'll have you arrested for domestic terrorism. For adjusting a federally documented valve on my own property, under a maintenance agreement signed by the Army Corps of Engineers. I took a slow sip. I'd love to see that arrest warrant. Judge Blackwell has no jurisdiction over federal water matters. Neither does your brother-in-law, the commissioner. Her face went the color of old snow. The Army Corps of Engineers inspection team arrives in 2 hours. They're very interested in your unpermitted water extraction operation. The EPA is sending representatives as well. Behind her, more vehicles were arriving. Golf carts and SUVs streaming up the mountain road as word spread through the community. 340 families who had woken up to dry taps and panicked phone calls, all converging on the source of their crisis. By 7:30, the meadow below my cabin looked like a refugee camp. Residents in bathrobes and hiking boots milled around, voices rising in confusion and anger. Some had brought water bottles, rationing what little they had saved. Others were already on their phones, trying to reach attorneys, plumbers, anyone who might explain what had happened. Dorinda climbed onto her golf cart like it was a podium, raising her voice above the chaos. This outsider is holding our community hostage. He's illegally shut off our water supply. This is an attack on everything we've built together. I walked down from the cabin porch, laptop under my arm, portable projector in my backpack. Wren followed with her camera, documenting everything. My father watched from his wheelchair on the porch, the morning sun warming his face for the first time in weeks without fear of confrontation. "I didn't shut off your water," I said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I reduced flow from a spring system my family has owned since 1889. Murmurs rippled through the gathered residents. Confused looks exchanged between neighbors. "The question you should be asking, Mrs. Blackwell, is, why has your HOA been illegally extracting that water for 15 years without ever telling you where it actually comes from?" I set up the projector against a white maintenance truck, angling it so the crowd could see. The morning sun was bright, but the images were clear enough. "This is the Federal Water Rights Certificate, priority date 1889, issued to the Whitfield family." The document filled the makeshift screen, official seals and signatures clearly visible. "This is the geological survey showing your community wells connect to an aquifer originating on my property. My father conducted this survey for the Army Corps of Engineers in 1978. More murmurs. People leaning forward, squinting at technical drawings that suddenly explained why their toilets would not flush. "And this," I clicked to the next slide, "is the financial record of Clearwater Mountain Management, LLC. Gasps erupted from the crowd. "Your HOA has paid $3.3 million over 15 years for water system maintenance. That company is owned by Garrett Blackwell, Dorinda's husband." All eyes turned to where Garrett stood beside his wife's golf cart, his construction company polo suddenly looking like a prison uniform. "Zero maintenance was ever performed. Your wells haven't been inspected since 2011. Your infrastructure is failing because nobody maintained it. They just pocketed your money." A man pushed through the crowd, tall and angry. "Who are you? Why should we believe any of this?" "My name is Cormac Whitfield. I spent 20 years as a hydrological systems engineer for the United States Army Corps of Engineers. I designed water infrastructure for military installations on 3 continents. I hold a federal security clearance, and I've testified as an expert witness in 11 water rights cases." I pointed toward the cabin porch, where my father sat watching. That man is Aldous Whitfield, Vietnam veteran, Bronze Star recipient. He surveyed this entire aquifer system for the federal government in 1978. He's protected these water rights for 46 years, while your HOA president tried to steal his land and his water. Dorinda's composure shattered completely. This is a setup. Garrett, call the attorneys, call Bradley, call your father. But Garrett was frozen, staring at the financial documents projected for everyone to see, at his own signature on shell company paperwork, at dollar amounts he had clearly never expected anyone to trace. "Dorinda?" a woman called from the crowd, still in her bathrobe. "Is this true? Have you been stealing from us?" "I've been protecting this community. Everything I've done has been for Summit Ridge. By pushing a 74-year-old veteran toward the lake?" Wren's voice cut through the noise. She held up her phone. "I have video. Want me to show everyone what protecting the community looks like?" The mood shifted like wind before a storm. Angry faces, crossed arms, neighbors who had trusted Dorinda for 15 years, now looking at her with something entirely different in their eyes. The sound of engines echoed off the peaks. 4 vehicles crested the ridge in formation. White trucks with Army Corps of Engineers logos. A black SUV with federal plates. A state vehicle marked Colorado Water Resources Division. They rolled to a stop at the edge of the crowd, doors opening in synchronized precision. Patricia Yamamoto stepped out first, followed by 3 inspectors and a woman in a suit I recognized from EPA Region 8 headquarters. "Dorinda Blackwell? Garrett Blackwell?" Patricia's voice carried the authority of federal law. "Please remain in the area. We have questions regarding federal water statute violations, unpermitted extraction from a protected aquifer system, and potential environmental crimes." Dorinda made one last attempt. "You can't do this. I know the governor." Patricia did not blink. "Ma'am, in Colorado, water rights are property rights. You've been stealing property for 15 years. The governor can't help you with that." The Army Corps inspectors spent 6 hours documenting violations. Unpermitted wells, illegal aquifer extraction, falsified water rights documentation, environmental damage from unmaintained infrastructure. The EPA took water samples from 14 locations, preliminary analysis revealing contamination from corroding well casings that should have been replaced years ago. Stellan presented his forensic findings to a growing audience of federal and state officials. $3.3 million in diverted funds. 15 years of falsified maintenance records. Payments to county officials disguised as consulting fees. By afternoon, the remaining HOA board had resigned. Commissioner Bradley Thornton had been notified that his office was under investigation. Judge Harlan Blackwell had recused himself from all matters involving our property, effective immediately. The water came back on once the inspections concluded. I opened the valve to full flow, watching the pressure gauges climb back to normal. 340 families could flush their toilets again, brew their coffee, take their showers. But now they knew exactly where that water came from. An elderly woman made her way through the dispersing crowd to where my father sat on the cabin porch. Mabel Thornwood, 83 years old, who had driven up from Silverthorne the moment she heard what was happening. "Aldous, she said quietly, taking his weathered hands in hers. "You held on. After everything they did to you, after Evelyn passed, after the stroke, you held on." My father's eyes glistened in the afternoon light. "She would have wanted me to. Ellen always said the mountains don't forget. They just wait." My mother's name. The woman who had crossed that dock on their wedding day, 50 years ago, The indictments came down 7 weeks later. Dorinda Blackwell, Garrett Blackwell, Commissioner Bradley Thornton, 2 county clerks who had falsified water rights documentation, a surveyor who had moved boundary markers for cash payments spanning 2 decades, 53 counts across 6 defendants, federal water theft, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud, public corruption. Blackwell Construction was liquidated, assets seized and distributed to a restitution fund for defrauded homeowners and the 17 families who had been driven off their land over 40 years. Judge Harlan Blackwell quietly retired rather than face an ethics investigation that would have ended his career in disgrace. Dorinda's light blue suit made one final public appearance in her booking photo. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The armor that had protected her for 15 years finally stripped away, revealing the hollow ambition beneath. 6 months later, the lake at sunrise looked exactly as it had for 135 years. The cabin was renovated now, proper insulation for mountain winters, solar panels for power, a new dock built to Army Corps specifications. Wren had her own room with a view of the Continental Divide, though she spent most of her time at the shore, filming a documentary about water rights in the American West. My father had physical therapy 3 times a week. He was walking short distances with a cane now, his determination stronger than the damage the stroke had caused. Every morning, he wheeled himself to the dock to watch the sunrise, the same ritual he had practiced for 50 years. Augustus Pemberton, the new HOA board president, stopped by regularly, retired water attorney, 71 years old, absolutely committed to doing things right. "You could have destroyed Summit Ridge," he said one afternoon, watching the light play across the water. "Kept the rights, charged us anything you wanted. In Colorado, that would have been completely legal. That was never the point. Then what was?" I looked toward the shore where my father was teaching Wren to identify aquatic plants, the same lesson he had given me 35 years ago. He spent 46 years being told he was wrong, being told his water wasn't his water, his land wasn't his land. They pushed him around because he was old, because he was stubborn, because he wouldn't sell. Augustus nodded slowly. "Some fights aren't about winning, Mr. Pemberton. They're about proving that the truth still matters, even in places where money usually wins." The lake reflects everything now. Sunrise, sunset, the peaks of the Gore Range, the faces of people who finally understand what was taken from them and who did the taking. Water finds its own level. My father taught me that when I was 8 years old, standing on this same shore. Corruption works the same way. You can dam it up, divert it, pretend it doesn't exist. But eventually, the pressure builds. Eventually, it finds its way to the surface. You just have to be patient enough to wait. My father turns 80 this spring. Still wheels himself to the dock every morning. Still watches the sun come up over water that belongs to our family, protected by documents older than the state itself. Dorinda Blackwell will be eligible for parole in 9 years. Her brother-in-law lost his next election by 51 points. The county clerk's office operates under new leadership now, with oversight committees and transparency requirements that did not exist before. And somewhere in Summit Ridge Estates, 340 families turn on their taps every morning and get clean water, from a spring protected by a Vietnam veteran who refused to let the mountains forget. Some people ask what happens when one person stands against a corrupt system in a place where money usually wins. I'll tell you what happens. But eventually, the system runs dry. If this story earned your respect, that like button and subscribe help more than you know. And if you want to support bringing these injustices to light, the thanks button below goes directly toward making that happen. Drop your craziest HOA story in the comments. The mountains are listening.
Just sharing some good energy today. Like the video and subscribe to read stories.